Glad you could be here. Here you are, Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You've had quite a journey from your childhood home in Union City, Tennessee.
That's right.
I gather your father was a farmer?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we go back many, many generations. The oldest farm that my brother and I own is in Fulton County, Kentucky, and it predates the establishment of the county by the Kentucky State Legislature.
Wow, that's old.
Yes, it's 200 years.
Wow. And so what did the farm grow?
Corn and soybeans now. In the past, we've done wheat. My father, who's deceased, but when he was a young man, they had some animal agriculture, largely cattle, but now it's just corn and soybeans.
And you helped on the farm?
Oh, very much so.
What was your job?
Well, my job was to first follow my father around and learn the business. And then I was involved in slowly learning, what it took, and then being involved in actually taking care of the land and running the machines, and then learning the business side. And actually, even though my background is in law in terms of what I've done in my own professional career, if you were to walk into my office when I was in the private practice of law in D.C., you would find that on my computer I always had open the Wall Street Journal commodity page on my computer so I could keep track of what the markets were doing and decide whether I wanted to make a futures transaction for our farm or not. So.
Well, back in the day, you might have been reading some of my grain reports from many years ago. So how long has it been since you last rode in a combine?
Oh, it's been a little while, and I cannot be involved in production agriculture in this role due to ethical reasons. But I am able to get up and, for example, mow the woods lot or what have you. And so actually a couple weeks ago I was home and I was up on the tractor and I was mowing the woods lot, and it is the best thinking time when you are up on farm machinery by yourself that I've ever experienced in any role. And I was cogitating something that we have at USDA, and while thinking it over, I came up with the answer, and I sought to call my chief of staff, and she wasn't available, but I talked to her later. It's very good quality thinking time, being up by yourself, just taking care of your business while thinking about other things.
That's a pretty good sales pitch. So here you are, you've ascended to the top ranks of USDA, and you're overseeing agriculture at a time when the farm economy is in a tough spot. How is the administration trying to help see farmers through this rough patch?
Well, first of all, we have a panoply of policy wins that were put in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, including increased reference prices, which are found in our traditional crop support programs. We have got a whole slew of permanent tax relief for all types of small businesses, which includes nearly every farmer. More than 98% of farms are pass-through entities. They'll get to take advantage of the fact that now they can 100% expense when they buy a new piece of farm equipment, when they buy a new grain bin. They no longer have to depreciate that over a number of years. It's 100% immediate expensing. And we're doing that all while implementing a bridge payment program, which, as the name suggests, is meant to get them through this growing season to the 1st of October, when many of the provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by Congress last year and signed by the President kick in.
And that bridge payment, that's the $13 billion that is going to row crop farmers and to specialty crop farmers?
It's $12 billion.
Okay.
And yes.
And then wasn't there $1 billion for the specialty crop farmers?
It was a total of $12 billion.
Got it.
Of which originally $11 billion was going to row crop and $1 billion to sugar and specialty crop. Thanks to the fact that we've distributed all of the monies that we expect for row crop, we had some left over, approximately $660 million, and so we took that and added it to the specialty crop payments, which were just announced by the Secretary on Friday when she was out in California.
And you said that you were just with some farmers in Indiana, some specialty crop farmers in Indiana, who are pretty happy recipients of this aid.
I was very happy to hear that when they looked at our $1.6 billion package, and one of the gentlemen said I compared it to the numbers that I ran roughly based on my operation, and what you calculated was about what I calculated. I took that as a high compliment.
So, we were looking back, and farmers have received government aid for much of the past decade, many of the years over the past decade, and I'm curious your thoughts on whether American farmers can stay in business these days without the government propping them up.
So I think the answer is yes, with wise policy solutions. Ultimately, everything in any economic sector goes back to supply and demand. And we have a lot of supply because we have wonderful productivity because of great innovations led by companies like you've interviewed here, including the CEO of Bayer. You go back 30 years ago, as he was talking about, before we had the genetic revolution in terms of the seeds that we plant and the traits that they represent, and compare the yields then to comparing the yields now, and there you have the entirety of the answer of why, with the declining agricultural footprint, we are still able to feed ourselves and the rest of the world, and why the problem we are dealing with is bounty and not deficit. And so I think a combination of focusing on making certain that every American knows what is on their plate, and that if what is on their plate comes from an American farmer, it should answer any question that they have about its nutritional value, its safety, or any other concern that they may have, and combining that with wise additional value uses, such as the wonderful biofuel policy, which was put forth by the EPA administrator, which has already seen dividends in the market prices for these crops.
So yes, with wise policy solutions, and that just we haven't had that the past decade.
Well, go back to the prior 4 years.
Okay.
Where did we go? Where did we find ourselves on the 20th of January, 2025?
Well,
we had 4 years of an administration that had no trade policy. Their trade policy is, we won't do a deal with anybody. And do you know who the only president in the history of the modern presidency, that's starting with the New Deal, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served an entire term in office, at least one, and did not sign a farm bill was? Joe Biden.
Okay, so I hear you. I want to get some other questions in too.
Well, but it goes to your point. If I don't care what industry you're talking about, it could be tech, it could be manufacturing, it could be agriculture. You take a 4-year vacation and don't open up any new markets and don't have any changes in policy, what is your company, what is that sector of the economy going to look like if you're off for 4 years?
Yeah, I hear you. So on trade, you mentioned, President Trump is just back from Beijing, where he met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. That relationship has been pretty fraught. What's the takeaway for farmers, given that China is one of their biggest customers?
Well, I think the takeaway is that agriculture is at the top of every trade deal with China or any other country. We have a very simple trade policy. If you want to do a trade agreement with the United States, agriculture is going to get a win. If agriculture isn't able to get a win, your country will not be able to negotiate a trade policy with this administration. The president negotiated a trade deal with China last year. It included specific metrics for soybean purchases. There was a lot of cavilling thrown at that number. China hit that number. They hit the 12 million metric ton
Have they
number.
made any purchases this crop year?
They are making purchases toward the 25 million, and we expect them to hit that this year, as well as next year. And then on top of that, the president has gotten additional commitments from the People's Republic of China of an additional $17 billion in ag purchases on an annualized basis for the remainder of his administration, on top of the commitments that he got during his first deal. And every indication that we have at the Department of Agriculture is that China intends to keep these commitments.
Just more broadly on trade, some commodities are still being impacted by various types of fees like tomatoes. Are you concerned that efforts to protect U.S. farmers through things like tariffs and other types of fees are driving up food prices?
So I think actually the issue with food prices that I'm more concerned about are input costs and not tariffs. When you look at what it costs to produce a bushel or an acre of any commodity that is purchased and compare that to what it was in 2020, it has soared. Labor costs, you're talking about specialty crops, tomatoes and what have you, up 40% since 2020. Farm machinery costs up 35%. Fertilizer, even worse. All of this has to make its way through the food chain. And this is because of a multivarying of factors. But it's to me, what's having more an effect than any tariffs. Because if you compare the United States' tariff regime to those we seek to sell to overseas, we actually have very low tariffs on foodstuffs. That's why most of our trade efforts on agriculture are offensive rather than defensive. The barriers are against our products going overseas, not so much against their products coming in here. And it's because of that discrepancy that American farmers need an aggressive trade policy.
So you mentioned fertilizer. The Iran war has obviously been very difficult for farmers, raising the cost of different inputs, fuel, fertilizer. How does the administration factor in the fallout for farmers?
Well, first of all, when it comes to fertilizer, if you're involved in agriculture, you know that the Iran war was an exacerbating factor, not the causation factor. We've seen increased costs of fertilizer for more than 5 years. And we have seen that, including with countervailing duties that were put in place on phosphate fertilizer by the Biden administration in April of 2021. And yet, the domestic companies have not responded with additional supplies. That is supposedly what these trade barriers were designed to do that the Biden administration put in place.
So what's the Trump administration's plan then for on fertilizer?
Well, as the Secretary has noted, we are having discussions at the cabinet level about whether those countervailing duties on fertilizer should continue. I have seen them both as a judge and now as a policymaker at USDA. So far as I can tell, American farmers have paid out an awful lot of extra profit to Mosaic and other companies like that for no benefit, and they have definitely received no additional supply. And here's the interesting thing when it comes to fertilizer. Let's take Mosaic as a particular example. They recently came out as part of their public reporting and said that they may need to curtail production in this country of phosphate fertilizer at a time when fertilizer supplies across the world are in question. And yet, despite that, they are at a record export pace of fertilizer that they have produced in this country that they are shipping overseas. Last month alone, according to Kepler data, Mosaic shipped more than 500% more fertilizer year over year out of this country to people who compete with this country, at the same time complaining about difficult business situations for manufacturing fertilizer in this country. It just doesn't add up.
Sure. And so changing that sounds like, could be really potentially positive, in the future. But what are you telling farmers who, say they don't have enough, they can't afford to put fertilizer on the crops this season?
Well, first of all, as I said, we're working on the CVD issue. But second of all, we have a host of people who, unlike some of the current market participants, are interested in generating new supplies. And I wish I could go through and talk with you about some of these, but they've been shared with us in confidence. But what I'm excited about across the entire panoply of fertilizers, like, for example, nitrates. What is the most expensive input into nitrate fertilizer? It's energy. You know what we have here in the United States? A much better energy policy than any of our Western competitor nations, because we did not, in this administration, disincentivize the use of fossil fuels. Even with the increase in fossil fuel price, we have far cheaper natural gas in the United States than they do in the European Union. Therefore, it's unsurprising that we have seen a host of people, including international companies, approach us and other departments about starting new fertilizer production facilities in the United States because they know we have the right energy policy. So it's spurring them on and seeing if there are regulatory barriers or strategic investments that could be made to either increase the scale of what they're already thinking or allow them to move what they're already seeking to do online faster.
Okay. Let's shift gears and talk about nutrition, starting with MAHA. So President Trump was elected by this strong bloc of Americans who really believed in RFK Jr. and his mission to make America healthy again. How does that movement factor into your decision-making and priorities at USDA?
Well, first of all, we all need to eat healthier, myself included. And so the focus on what we're eating and the nutritional value that it brings to all of us is very important. Second, I think, as I said before, that if you really want to make America healthy again, step one to that needs to be making what is on every American's plate American again. Because if it comes from an American farmer, if it comes from an American rancher, then you should not have any legitimate questions about food safety or nutritional value, and you can feed it to your family with confidence.
How does that work with crops that we don't grow in this country?
Well, obviously there are certain crops that we do have to import, but the vast majority of what we consume, we grow internally. And up until the previous administration, we actually had an ag trade surplus in this country dating back 60 years. So the notion that we need to import most of what we eat is a fallacy that the statistics prove out, that is not the case.
So obviously, MAHA refers to sort of a lot of different policies that the administration is thinking about. Are you concerned? You mentioned affordability. Are you concerned that some of the changes that MAHA wants to see, that those will raise prices at the grocery store?
So I think you've hit on it. In order for the Make America Healthy Again movement to be successful, it needs to take into account all of our needs to eat healthier while factoring in affordability and a third element, which you have not mentioned, which is gold standard science. We've got to make certain that everything we do is scientifically based and can be justified by peer-reviewed level science. If we can integrate all three of those things, then the movement will be successful and will have positive results for all of the American people.
We were just hearing on the previous panel a lot about beef, and obviously a huge pain point for consumers. And we heard support, previously today and last night from JBS and Whataburger CEOs for increasing beef imports to lower burger prices. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, we have already seen record levels of imports into this country. I think there are some people who mistakenly believe that we don't import anything in this country. That's not correct. Currently,
this is about increasing imports.
Currently, we are seeing imports at a record level, and that's despite the fact that the Mexican border has been closed because of the New World screwworm to try to prevent it from coming into this country. But we also understand that most of the beef we consume is raised right here in the United States, and that's why USDA has put forward a plan to try to put as much land as possible under federal government control that is available for grazing, allowing it to be grazed, while I am working with my counterpart at the Interior Department, Kate McGregor, to look at each other's regulations, redline them, and get us on the same page. So if you're a rancher out west, and this is very common, and part of the year you're on Bureau of Land Management land, which is Interior, and the other part of the year you're on Forest Service land, which is USDA, I want it to be as frictionless as possible. So you'll see rulemaking proceedings going forward before the end of the year to equalize the playing field between the two agencies and our regulations.
Okay, so speaking of rulemaking, I don't know how much beef is served at schools, but I did want to talk about school meals. USDA is working on new standards for what schools have to serve to kids to be in alignment with the new dietary guidelines. And Secretary Rollins has said that she wants to completely and fundamentally change school meals. How are you going to do that?
So this is where the rubber meets the road. It began earlier this year with the debut of the dietary guidelines, which had a simple message from both cabinet secretaries, Rollins and Kennedy. That's eat real food, things that people would recognize years ago as food and don't come in a package. What we've got to do now is actualize that through a regulatory process that takes into account affordability, because the school lunch program has a set budget, and we know that families' budgets are tight, while also taking into account the best of nutrition science. So you will see, rolling forward later this year, a rulemaking proceeding that will put all of our proposals out for public comment. I know you've got representatives of the School Nutrition Association, among other agencies, here at the conference. We look forward to hearing what they have to say and taking the input that they give us and putting it in a final rule.
Yeah, because isn't revamping school meals just enormously expensive? Like, are you working to convince lawmakers that this is worth spending a lot of money on?
So the regulatory process itself is not enormously expensive. What we've got to do is to make certain that we don't foist a whole lot of additional expenses onto already beset local budgets of school systems.
But that's what's being talked about. I mean, I remember Secretary Rollins, she promised Senator Booker at her confirmation hearing last year that she would reduce ultra-processed foods in school meals. That means more scratch cooking. That's the enormously expensive part. And I'm wondering whether that commitment will be reflected in the new standards.
It doesn't necessarily have to result from more scratch cooking. But what it does mean is purchasing more whole food items and fewer items that have already been pre-seasoned or otherwise processed.
What's an example?
Necessarily mean, well, more fruits and vegetables, more whole meats, fewer things like pizza and what have you, which may be popular on certain days. They certainly were when I was in elementary school, but aren't necessarily the best for you. But I'll point to you an act of Congress that recently came through, the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act. Kids love milk, including flavored milks. And believe it or not, to show you how far we had gotten in this country from, forget sound nutrition policy, just common sense, it was illegal in this country, illegal, to, as part of the school lunch program, give kids whole milk. It was illegal in this country under previous administrations to give them chocolate milk or strawberry flavored milk, even at the 2% level, 2% milk fat level. And so are we surprised that when you take what kids find that is both healthy and meets their palates off the table, that they eat less of it and get less healthy? I'm not.
Yeah, school meal regulations have been a point of a lot of debate. Let's take a question from the audience. Okay, I see an eager hand over here.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. My question is this on? I don't know. Okay, there it is. Sorry. To your point about looking at the success of MAHA, I'm curious. I always think in terms of if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, or how do we manage what we can't measure? And I think when it comes to nutrition, whether it be the nutrient composition of the food that we grow and consume, we don't have a scalable mechanism to actually measure that food. So our nutrient composition is based on outdated data from databases that were just, that put together by a sample of one. And then also we don't really have good outcome measures for what it looks like to be healthy. So we know that we can identify the absence of disease or the absence of being of health, but we don't have good measures for health. So I'm curious, especially I love that you're emphasizing the peer-reviewed and the science aspect. Is that going to be part of like the vision that you have for actually seeing MAHA through to success?
First,
and can I be part of it?
Let me thank the students from the Chicago Ag Sciences School who have been working this conference and are wearing the wonderful blue FSA jackets. It is wonderful to see in one of the largest cities in the United States that agriculture is still a focus, and I know how important agriculture is for the state of Illinois and its economy overall. But to answer your question, yes, data is very important, and we're not only looking at it in things like school nutrition and what have you. Keep in mind that 23 states in this country have gotten waivers from USDA to limit what can be purchased from the food stamp program, the SNAP program. Most commonly, they have restricted the purchases of candy, sugary flavored beverages, and other such unhelpful items. And the question is there a measurable improvement in public health in those 23 states as they go forward with that effort? And if there is, are we collecting data in the right place to be able to catch it?
So what's the answer?
I think the answer is that because it's a state-by-state experiment with regard to SNAP, we will have to work with our state partners to capture the data. But one of the most important things I think we can receive feedback in through our rulemaking, our requests for information, and other processes is to hear from those of you who are involved in this on a daily basis of what metrics we should be looking at, what are the best ways to keep track of them, and if there is someone who is already doing it of whom we are not aware, who are they and how we can get in touch with them.
Is there one more question from the audience? Okay, I see one right there.
So Stephen, question for you. I'm Rich Kottmeyer, Chief Strategy Officer of FutureBridge. My question for you is really very simple. So we have food as national security, but often there is a distinction between the regulations at the national level and at the state level. And increasingly, specialty crops are becoming harder and harder for farmers to be profitable on because of the regulatory nature of some of the Western states.
Yes.
What is the thought process for rationalizing that, where you have 50 states worth of need and only a few states that really can produce what that security need is?
Well, this is an area in which I'm quite passionate, and it involves the intersection of policy and the law, and has brought about things such as, for example, the Proposition 12 Supreme Court case, which I can tell you from my perspective, both as a former federal judge and as a person involved in ag policy, is one of the worst reasoned, most wrong decisions the Supreme Court has issued in my lifetime for a host of reasons, whether you're looking at the constitutional merits or whether you're looking at its procedural posture and a bunch of appellate judges doing fact-finding on a motion to dismiss, which is a no-no. But to get outside of the law, you've hit your nose on it. California, Oregon, Washington, these are states that are heavily specialty crop. And yet if you look at their state governments, they're increasing the regulatory burden, they are increasing the paperwork burden, They are treating farmers the same way they're treating every other business in those states, with disdain and with a failure to understand that the private economy, unlike the federal government, does not have a printing press. And they have to make money the old-fashioned way. They have to earn it. And the government does nothing but get in the way, typically. In the meantime, we have other areas of our country, like Texas, like Florida, like other places in the Southeast, that are growing in terms of specialty crop production. And so we have to find a way in this country to have a regulatory piece, but it starts with something that our founders realized, since this is the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. We have had two constitutions in this country. It's something that people forget. Our original constitution was called the Articles of Confederation. It failed miserably, and it was replaced by our current constitution, the one we still use today. Why did the Articles of Confederation fail? It failed because of things like Proposition 12. Because back then, the 13 original colonies, now the new United States, and as states were added to it, started treating each other as though they were foreign countries and put up trade barriers along the lines of what California has done. Oh, we don't want your product, Iowa, coming into our state. And our founders had a significant realization. It was, if we don't have a national market, then we don't have a nation. And that's something I think we would all do well to remember in this country. That's something that should have been learned more than 2 centuries ago. We're all in this together, and if a product is okay to be sold in Iowa or Tennessee, it ought to be good enough for California and New York.
All right. Oh, some folks really like that. We're over time. I'm going to squeeze one last one in, and then we will let you all go. This is, to your point about different areas of the country, a lot of rural areas in this country are struggling. What is the Trump administration doing to make rural America a better economic bet for young people who want to start careers and grow their families? What's the sales pitch for rural America right now?
So I'm going to talk about this personally.
Okay.
Because
in just about a minute.
I'm from Obion County, Tennessee. I was born there. I came to this event from there. I still go home there on weekends. It is my home. It always will be. When I grew up, of course, we're the most agriculturally productive county in Tennessee. But on top of that, you had a whole bunch of blue-collar jobs in manufacturing, including in the clothing industry, in the tire industry, in all sorts of manufacturing industries. And built on top of that were small-town banks, restaurants, and other things which led to a vibrant rural economy. Following the signing of the first broad-scale free trade agreements in the mid-1990s, and as we got into the early 2000s, a lot of that dried up. You go to my county now, there's not a movie theater in the county.
So what's USDA and the administration
What we are
this?
seeking to do is to have a policy which focuses on creating jobs across this country, including manufacturing jobs and blue-collar jobs, so that we can bring these industries that left 30 years ago back to areas of the country, particularly in rural America, where there is that workforce that has those blue-collar skills and the work ethic, so that we can have some shared prosperity in this country and it not be limited to just a few places along the coast.
Okay, well, the voters in the next elections will measure your success. And